Hello, everybody. Welcome back to CAEL Live. As you know, we start each episode with a quote. Here's your quote for today: "The constant happiness is curiosity." It's a very cute quote. The constant happiness is curiosity. As always, I will reveal the order towards the end, but if you know the answer already, comment below. Let's start our show. Hello again. My name is Ashwati, and if you're joining us for the first time, CAEL Live is an interactive series where we guide you through your journey to Canada as an international student. We will be talking about international student life, Canadian higher education, admissions, and much more. We will also, of course, be talking about the CAEL test. Now, if you're wondering what the CAEL test is, it is an academic English language test for Canada. The difference between this and other English tests is that this one is specifically made for students wishing to pursue their education in Canada. This test is accepted and preferred by more than 180 institutions, and it can now be taken online at home. So, today we're talking about the steps we need to take after receiving a college acceptance letter. What are the steps you, as in an international student, needs to take, and what are the resources offered to you by your institution once you receive your acceptance? And because you only deserve the best of the best, we invited Andrew Ness, who is the Dean of International at Humber College. Let's give him a warm welcome. Hello, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on K Live. We're really excited to have you here. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Aswati. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm really glad to be able to engage with you and with the audience.
Wonderful. So, for the people who are watching, this is a great opportunity to find out more about international education at Humber College from the Dean himself. So, please go ahead and ask your questions in the comments below.
Mhm.
So, Andrew, I would like to start off first with you. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Humber College.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I'm the dean, of course, so the head of the international department. Humber has had a long tradition of internationalization. And of course, the cornerstone of the work that we do with international students is welcoming students to the country, uh, giving students access to our programs. You know, we routinely have over 6,000 international students studying at Humber from 130 different countries. Um, our programs, almost all of them, I think the percentage now is about 97%, have work integrated learning. So they have some sort of work experience, some sort of co-op, some sort of internship, and we engage there. We also support students, of course, with some of the intersections, like with our immigration department here in Canada. We provide many study abroad opportunities. And in the current situation with COVID, our opportunities for study abroad are actually virtual. So we have students engaging currently with a key partner of ours in Japan, with partners in India, Indonesia, and Peru, as an example. And we also invest in capacity development. So we're doing a lot of work currently in Kenya, helping colleges in Kenya do development work. So it's a pretty broad-based department. I know today we're talking with international students, so we'll focus on that side, but in terms of my role, it's really many different sides of international education.
Oh, wonderful. That is, that's great to know. Thank you so much for sharing. And so since we are, we will touch up on that, but I also wanted to talk about like our topic, which is about like admissions and what do you do after getting a college acceptance letter. So especially now during this current situation, like you just brought up, what would you recommend international students do after they get accepted? What is the first thing that they should be doing?
Um, that's a terrific question, and it's dominant in all of our students' minds. So I appreciate the opportunity to answer it. And I would say to a student, think about what you learned in the first year of study at the place you're studying right now. So when you walked in the door first day, and then you spent the year, there was a whole number of different things you learned, and you thought at the end of that first year, gosh, I wish I'd known that when I came in. And really, what I think students have to do once they get acceptance is think about those things they learned the first year they spent at an institution. The overlay, of course, is that you're actually in a different part of the world. And so there's some fundamental questions around what are studies like? How many hours a week do I go to class? And particularly if you're coming from a different education system, what times of day do people study? Do they go to the college every day? Do they go only certain days? Do they go different times? What times does the college start and end? Because of course that changes depending on the country you're coming from. How formal is it in class? So part of this is saying, all right, how can I get my expectations aligned? So what's the professor going to be like? Should I stand up when the professor comes in the class? Should I say sir? Should I say Mr. or Ms. Or can I call them by their first name? Part of this is actually shaping your expectation. The other question I think that students have to ask is, how am I going to be graded? Which seems like a simple question, but in fact, there are many, many, many different ways that colleges around the world grade students. Some places, you wait till the very end of studies and there's a 100% exam. Some places, there's marks of some sort almost every class. Some places, you're graded on your participation. So at Humber, for instance, there's a lot of group work where there's work to be done with a small group of students in that class you're studying, and there's a project that has to be delivered at the end. So asking those questions and being prepared and thinking about the way you can be successful, those are all academic questions that I think are really important to prepare you to know what's going to come and asking questions. And certainly Humber, like many institutions, can provide that information for you. We're happy to connect you with students who are in the course who know those answers, who really tell the real story of what does happen, what was different from back home, and how can I better prepare to be ready for this. So I think those are some of the fundamental academic questions that students really start to think about. And all of that, you're doing all of that primarily because it sets you up to be successful. Because you want to know, well, I want to get out of the gate strong. I want to get through that first year strong. We know the first year is often the most difficult. What do I need to put in place to be successful? That's really, those questions all add up to helping students do that.
Wonderful. You actually raised some really important questions that I, as a student, never thought of before applying to study abroad. So thank you. Those are really valuable. And you did kind of talk about having students be in touch with the students who are already at Humber, right, for getting their answers. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how students, what are the resources that Humber has to provide answers for students?
We're fortunate that we're in a time of life where digital communication is really easy, and it's simple, it's easy for students to access, and it's really familiar. And because of that, we're able to make digital connections with students, to current students, and we do that through different tools. We use Slack a fair bit. Now we're using Microsoft Teams a fair bit. There are a whole host of different ways we can connect prospective students with current students to tell the real story. These different social media platforms as well. So there's a host of different ways that can happen. And the good news is that we don't have to rely on face-to-face, and because there's trust in the digital media. And so we actually set up opportunities for students to do that, to make those connections. So we will make the introductions, we will run webinars, actually a lot like this, where students will be able to talk and chat with real students and hear the real story. And I think what's most important, and this is true, I think, of most institutions, it's not just Humber, is that we're not trying to paint only a rosy picture. It's really important for us to be as honest as we can, because it may be the case that there's some stuff that some students have to really spec up on that may give them some difficulty. It may be the case that some of our current students have some challenges that we haven't fixed yet. Well, we're happy to talk about that. We don't try and paint a picture that's not real. We try to be honest and say, yeah, you better. This is going to be difficult in this aspect, or you may really want to spend a bit of extra time preparing for this type of study. So we certainly do that as much as we can. Did that answer your question, Aswati?
Yes, it did. And transparency is key. So I thank you for saying that as well. Um, one thing that, and you did touch up on this before as well, but one thing that I see a lot of students ask, especially international students, on social media, a lot of them ask, "Hey, I'm going to Humber this fall. Are there any other international students? Can we hang out?" So, while they're doing their job, I'm also like curious to know what Humber is doing, or like what you think is important for institutions to do to make sure that international students feel like they're part of the community when
Sure.
they travel.
I think that's a really important question, an important consideration, and it's important not only for students, of course, but it's important for their families to know that a place like Humber takes those relationships seriously and takes responsibility for providing opportunities to set those relationships. So we have a number of different programs, whether it's mentorship programs, whether it's peer advising programs. Those are all sort of the formal ones. But if we step back from that, Humber's one of the largest institutions of its kind in the country. We have 32,000 students, many 180 programs. So there's a host of different ways to meet students, and people don't check passports before they introduce one another. And because we're in such a multicultural city, really the most dynamic, or one of the most dynamic multicultural cities in the world, you would never know who's international and who isn't. It's almost impossible to tell. And so people connect and integrate in ways just by virtue of the fact that the way we teach. This is an interesting aspect that maybe students don't think of, and that is with respect to the dynamics in the classroom. Now, I know you're asking about how do students meet, and I'm back to talking about academics. But if we think about a classroom, we don't have lecture halls with 500 seats. We have relatively small rooms, 40, 50, sometimes 60 seats. And they're organized in such a way that students are sort of facing one another because it actually aids in learning. But the dynamics of the way those classes work, not only in terms of the way they're set up, but also in terms of their sizes, that students interact just naturally. We also, with our instruction, we are really a devotee of applied learning, which means we're using real life examples. We're trying to mimic the kind of experience you need to be able to be successful in the workplace, which means you do lots of work in small groups. It means you do lots of work where you're perhaps working with another student and giving feedback on reports. And so the way in which we're teaching aids in the way in which students connect with one another. So there's the non-academic stuff, and there's the academic stuff that also integrates together to connect students.
Thank you for answering that. I think that was a very good answer to my question, because I was really curious, especially since you talked about integrated, academic and outside. I also want to know if, and this is just something that I'm asking after I heard your answer, is there a good example of an activity that you think works really well in the situation like this, especially during COVID, where international students are back home and they have to tune in through their laptops, they have Zoom calls and they have Zoom lessons, and how does integration work in that scenario?
That's a great question, and I think it's really important. I think you said transparency, and along with that goes honesty. So let's be honest. This is a difficult time for students, and we know it's a difficult time, and we're doing as much as we can to be able to connect with students, despite the fact people are so widely dispersed around the world. But I'll tell you about a project we ran this summer called the Global Systems Gap Challenge. So we ran an initiative where we gave students a really significant problem based on the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we had close to 400 students participating from 42 different countries. And they were integrated all using online platforms, mostly Teams actually. And they had mentors working with them. I happened to be a mentor with one of the teams. And so we were providing some instruction and some connection, and then the students were actually integrating together, solving a problem. So I'm going back to that group work example, Swati, but really it's an example where students were really, you could say, almost emotionally connected, despite the fact they weren't physically connected. And a lot of it was the meaningfulness of the work that they were doing. A lot of it was the way in which they had to interact with other students in order to produce what was required for the challenge. And they really had to think about their position relative to the other people in the group and really work through who was going to put forward the argument and which advice they will take, this one versus this one. It was a very interesting dynamic situation. And when we finished the challenge, I was left with really positive feelings about the potential of online learning, because it demonstrated for me that the young generation really is entirely capable of engaging and being emotionally connected despite these physical distances and challenges. And certainly we are hopeful, like everybody else, that this is a temporary scenario. And so we expect that what we're doing is setting a foundation where students are starting in a fairly disparate way, but we'll be on campus. And what we want to do is when they come to campus and say, oh, it's you, and I remember you from X, and they're actually meeting physically once they're able to travel to Canada and study at home.
That's wonderful. I mean, like the way you talked about it, especially that activity, it really wanted me to feel like being a student again, because that is so involved and that's wonderful. Like there's so many conversations you will have in that situation that you wouldn't have as a normal student. So I think that's perfect.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. I see myself as a bit of an old guy, and I really, it had to be proven to me that young people were able to work in the medium, and it was more than confirmed. Watching it was remarkable. It was so affirming for me to realize just how, we talk about how well young people use technology, but seeing it in such an applied way with such really tight, meaningful emotional connections and tremendous academic output, because the work they did was really superb. That was really heartening.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm not Gen Z, but I also sometimes feel more secure behind the screen to talk about
Right.
my feelings and what I
Right.
feel. So it's a perfect medium, and I think that in a few, I mean, like you said, this is a hard time, but in a few ways, this is also proving to be really effective in many other ways.
Right.
Uh, so let's go and talk about, let's move on and talk about what students can do after they're already in their course. And a lot of students have follow a pathless travel. They have questions about, is this course lucrative? Will this lead me to to a lucrative job? Will I be able to make money off of this? So what do you recommend to students who want to follow a path less traveled and are hesitant to do so because of the fact that they may not be able to make money off of it?
That's a tremendous question, and I know I've said that about all your questions, but that's a really good one. and the reason I say that is I've worked supporting students for a very long time. I think this is probably 35 years since I've been doing this. It's a long time. And 35 years ago, when I started, traveling to high schools here in the Toronto area and talking to students, what struck me almost immediately was students thought they should do something because of some external factor. So you mentioned money, right? I want to make a lot of money, so I'm going to do that over there. And at the time, 35 years ago, accounting seemed to be very popular. And for some students, they really, really, really loved accounting, but that was internal. It wasn't external. And your comment about path less traveled, I think, is to say, look, some students say, I'm going to do this, and the motivation is entirely outside of themselves. But the people that know what they truly love inside, what they love to do, what they have passions for, what burns inside of them, that, that may not have been the most popular choice.
Yes.
But in fact, if that's what is going to motivate you to get up every morning and do the best you can, I really think what winds up happening is the money follows. And it will follow because you can be exceptional because you're driven from this sort of spirit inside to be exceptional. And as philosophical and as maybe artsy as that sounds, and difficult to have that conversation with certain people,
Right.
parents,
Yes.
I've seen lots of examples where that actually proves to be true. And because people pursue their passions, and because of that passionate commitment to it, it's not just the external motivation, it's internally they're passionate about what they're doing, and they can, that becomes something they can monetize and be successful.
Is there an example you'd like to share with us? You just mentioned that you have some examples in your mind.
Well, and I didn't tell you this before we got on the call, but I'm going to use me.
Okay, perfect.
So, and the reason is I thought I should get a good job, but I'd always, when I was a young person, I'd always been absolutely in love with music and played music, and that's all I'd ever done. And but I thought I should not take music because I couldn't see a path where I would be able to make money. And so I went into chemical engineering for 1 year. And I had to be average, but I hated it. It wasn't my passion. So I stopped that for a year, and then I worked for a year. And then, so at 21, I went back and took a bachelor's degree in music.
Oh.
And of course, that's not what I'm not playing music now. I still do that. But that opportunity led me to an internship that started me student recruiting, that started this entire other career quite by accident. And then I wound up doing a master's degree 6 years later, and then wound up working for a company in the US and living in the Emirates. And it's spawned an entire career from the fact I really just simply pursued my passion. And I still am committed to music part-time, and I still do it, but I was able to actually focus, get great grades, really develop some skills, like performance skills, for instance, that I still use when I'm speaking to groups. Maybe I'm using them right now, I'm not sure. But part of that is, so you just never know. The path less traveled is something because it was unpredictable. I couldn't see at the end what the money was going to be, but I had faith that I was doing the right thing. I knew what I didn't want to do, just pursue your passion. But I kept my mind open, I kept my eyes open, I looked for opportunities. I wasn't just merely thinking I'm going to go and do this and this is the only thing I can do and nothing will work. I was very open to opportunity, and it paid dividends. And I do think that can really work for young people. But again, you have to be open, but you pursue your passion, you develop an excellent track record, and things can work.
Yeah, it's a very inspiring, it's very inspiring to listen, because I also had a similar path. I mean, of course,
really?
Yes, I did 100 million things. I come from a culture that's kind of not that open to taking risks, especially if you're, from a middle class family that doesn't have the money to support you to do whatever you want.
Right.
It's a valid fear. So I went from engineering to design to performance to this. So but throughout my journey, especially with jobs, I always found myself in the education industry, always, like whether it was teaching performance, whether it was working for marketing or doing things like this. That is through that journey is when I found out that, okay, what you really want to do is help people learn. You really want to be there when people are learning. Like, education is what you like. So it took me a while, but here I am.
Well, I'm, from your design background, you've got that Edvard Munch painting in the background. I really like that, but I haven't that's the Scream, right? You got the Scream in the background there?
That's
Van Gogh.
Yes, that's Van Gogh.
Sorry, Van Gogh. I was looking for the figure of the Scream, but it's Van Gogh. You're right. Sorry.
Yes, it's the Starry Night, which is it's the common favorite painting, but I stand by my choice. I really like it. It makes me happy when I look at it. So
Well, that internal motivation, right? That, you know, you
yes,
think about where the passion comes from, and so congratulations. That's a great story.
thank you so much. Okay, so let's talk about I'm gonna shift the dial a little bit and talk
Sure.
about testing, especially since you mentioned that you've been in different places, like you've been in the United States, you've worked with international students. You have years of experience working in higher education, in the industry, and especially with in terms of like international students coming to study in Canada. How do you think taking a Canadian academic test benefits international students towards their future here?
So, you know, it's almost a hand in glove scenario to me, where um, the language that you used maps to where you're going to be living. And listen, we know people in Canadian international education know too well, that students really aspire to not only study here, but ultimately become resident here. Many of our students are looking to do that. And taking Canadian tests is investment in the future. You know, you're invested because you're preparing for a test, and this is a requirement that many students have to undergo in order to be able to come into the country, be admitted or what have you. And so that investment really just is another one in the future. Certainly, people who aspire to stay, I think it's a logical commitment to make as you think about what that future aspiration is.
That was very well put. Thank you so much for saying that. Yes, looking at it as an investment does make a lot of sense. Thank you so much for talking about that. We also want to, I'm also curious to know, with talking about the same topic, we offer CAEL Online. So for people who are watching, you can, if you're in Canada or the United States, you can take the CAEL test at home,
Right.
in your pajamas. And Humber College was one of the first few people to accept that, first few institutions to accept CAEL Online as an academic test that they will accept when you apply. So I wanted to know from you, what was one of the reasons you decided to accept CAEL Online?
Well, you know, it goes back to what I said earlier in part. So I'll speak to online specifically, but you know, we want to support CAEL because we believe very strongly in Made in Canada solutions. Um, and you know, that belief in Made in Canada is reinforced and supported when an organization like yours provides an online solution for students in response to this really significant set of changes. And of course, we were going to support the online because we want to make sure students have opportunities that they can demonstrate competency that are both helpful for the student, but also that we're assured will give us results that we can count on that demonstrate competency. You know, there are some online um, opportunities where students are demonstrating competency, but there isn't any um, not necessarily the kind of rigor or security or leave us with confidence that it's actually the student's results. You know, and what makes me happy about the CAEL Online is that we can be assured that it's a true reflection of what the student has learned in terms of being prepared for the test. But more importantly, we know that it's the student's work, and we know that it's an accurate reflection of the student's um, competency to be able to be functional and be successful here at Humber.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to hear you say that. If you guys are interested in learning more about the CAEL Online or just the CAEL test, there is a link in the description below. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of our session. Again, wonderful answers. I am sure that students who are watching will have learned a lot and will be inspired to take the path less traveled if they want to do so. I will leave you with one last question.
Sure.
What is your favorite part about working with international students choosing to study in Canada?
Mhm. My favorite part. See, that's probably the hardest question you ask, because I have to choose one because there's so many, you know. So, so my father was an immigrant to this country, and many people watching will know this, but you know, Canada is a country that has been incredibly successful, largely because so many really hardworking, capable people have come here. And I feel incredibly fortunate to watch. I guess the favorite, to answer your question, everything I see is I watch these tremendous young people come and make a commitment, of course, in the immediate term to Humber, commitment to studies, commitment to their classmates, to their faculty members, etc. But really what they're doing is making a commitment to this country. And uh, and what we reap as a nation, what we reap as a society, you can't possibly measure. It's so rich. And so the fact that I have a very small part to play in that richness and continuing that richness is what I like the most.
Wonderfully answered, as usual. Thank you so much. I got goosebumps. This question is something that we ask like our guests who come here because we're all curious to know what, especially from the education industry, what you guys think about us. But every time, the answer is always so succinct and like so beautiful that I'm really happy to ask this question again and again.
That's a great question. Listen, it's an important one. Students are trying to feel things out. What are they going to get when they come to Humber? And I think what's important to leave students with is I'm not really exceptional. Humber is kind of like this. There's people will talk to you, people will be honest, and people will try and help. So, joining our community, you'll hear a lot of the same things that you're hearing from me when you come to study with us.
Wonderful. That's beautifully put. For those of you who are watching, this was Andrew Ness. He is the Dean of International at Humber College. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks. So nice to be with you, Juan. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So if you still have questions that you wanted to ask us about the CAEL test or anything about higher education in Canada, please let us know in the comments below. We will get to it in the next episode. We received comments about CAEL lessons, so I just wanted to let you guys know that CAEL test lessons will be on a separate playlist. It is called CAEL Prep with Brandy. Brandy is our instructor here at Paragon. We drop a lesson every Tuesday. Please do check it out. You can ask CAEL Prep questions as well in the comments below, or you can ask them in the comments in CAEL Prep with Brandy. Brandy will answer them in the next episode, or there will be opportunities when Brandy is live and you can ask her the questions yourself. Okay, it is now time to find out who the author of our quote is. So I shared a quote with you early on in the episode. The constant happiness is curiosity. This quote was said by Alice Munro. She is a Nobel Prize winning short story writer. If you want to learn more about her, there will be a link that will be shared either in the chat or in the description. Please do check it out. More importantly, if you are an international student living abroad in Canada, you may be living abroad or in Canada, you may be eligible for the CAEL scholarship. If you took the CAEL test on or after July 2020, or if you're planning to take it in the near future, you can win up to 5,000 Canadian dollars towards your tuition. I will link our scholarship page below as well, and you can check it out. If you have any doubts, you know what to do. You can also reach out to us on our Instagram account. It's at CAEL Test. We're pretty active on there, and if you have any specific questions, do send us a DM and we will respond to you. Our next episode will be on Thursday, 8th October at 11 a.m. PST. Yes, we're taking a small break next week, but for the episode on 8th, we're hoping to invite one of our scholarship winners. So please join us and also invite anybody else who is interested in studying in Canada or is interested in learning about institutions in Canada. Until then, please stay safe and have a nice weekend. Bye.